Ranger stopped cold. No bark, no whine, just stillness. His body was rigid, tail low, ears locked forward like antennae, eyes fixed on the dark space inside the cabin. Logan Pierce tightened the leash in his gloved hand. The early winter wind swept through the empty valley behind them, rattling the loose shutters on the cabin's single broken window. "It's just a run-down shack, buddy," Logan muttered, forcing a half-smile. Ranger didn't move. The leash stretched taut, his paws planted like cement blocks on the frost-bitten dirt. His breath came slow but heavy, white steam curling from his nostrils. He wasn't scared. Logan knew this stance. It was the same stance Ranger took in Kandahar, 3 seconds before a sniper round tore through the Humvee door. Logan took a step forward. Ranger growled, a low, warning rumble, almost a vibration in the leash. And just like that, Logan's gut twisted. This wasn't fear. It was instinct. Ranger had saved his life 3 times overseas, sometimes by reacting to things nobody else could sense. A shift in the air, a scent on the wind, a silence that was too quiet. Now, in a remote part of Montana, standing before a $200 cabin he'd bought at a foreclosure auction, Ranger was telling him one thing. Something's not right here. Logan scanned the porch. Sagging floorboards, rusted hinges. The screen door leaned on one screw. Paint peeled off the cabin in flakes like old scabs. But nothing visibly dangerous. Just forgotten. Still, Ranger's hackles didn't lie. He knelt down beside the German shepherd and ran a calming hand down the dog's back. "It's just us now," he whispered. "A roof, 4 walls, and some damn peace. That's all we came for." Ranger shifted slightly. His eyes flicked to a corner near the inside entryway. And stayed there. Logan turned. From this angle, through the half-open door, he could just make out the corner of the living room, if you could call it that. Dust hung in the air like cobwebs. A broken rocking chair lay tipped over, a heavy wool blanket still tangled around its arm. Behind it, a shadow clung to the wall. Not a person, not a thing. Just heavy and cold. He stepped back. For the first time in years, Logan felt something he hated. Vulnerability. Not the kind from war. The kind that crawled up your spine from something you couldn't name. He exhaled and straightened his back. "Let's get this over with." The floor groaned beneath his boots as he stepped inside. Ranger followed, hesitant but obedient. The dog's nails tapped the wood, his eyes never leaving the dark corner. Inside, the air was stale. Smelled like old sweat and wet ash. A fireplace sat choked with soot. An old photograph hung crooked above the mantel. Glass cracked, frame warped. A man and a woman, both stiff-faced. No kids. No warmth. Logan turned back toward the corner. There was nothing there. Yet Ranger still stared. Now his nose twitched, and Anta. Then, for the first time since they'd arrived, he barked. Once. Sharp. Commanding. It wasn't just a bark. It was a warning. Logan's hand dropped to the side holster he no longer carried. The reflex still lived in his muscles, years after he turned in his badge and walked away from the Corps. He stepped toward the corner, heart hammering. Nothing. He crouched and ran a hand across the floorboards. One plank, near the baseboard, had shifted slightly. Not from where, from purpose. Ranger stood beside him, breathing slow and deep. Watching. Waiting. Logan pressed down. The board dipped with a muted creak, then clicked. There was a hollow space underneath. Logan looked at Ranger. Ranger stared back, tail frozen, eyes steady. "You sure?" A second bark. Short. Urgent. Logan dug into his bag and pulled out a flathead screwdriver. He wedged it under the edge and pried upward. The plank popped loose, revealing a shallow compartment lined with dust and age. Inside was a metal tin, no bigger than a lunchbox. Rusted shut. Ranger sat down, but his body was still tense. Logan pried the lid open. Inside were papers, folded letters, a faded photo, and what looked like a child's bracelet. Pink plastic, with one charm still clinging on. A letter on top was addressed in careful, looping handwriting. For whoever finds this, please don't forget me. Logan didn't realize how hard he was gripping the tin until Ranger whined beside him. He sat back, suddenly cold, not from the air, from knowing, deep in his chest, that whatever peace he came here for wasn't waiting inside these walls. Something else was, and his dog had felt it first. The morning after the discovery in the floorboards, Logan sat on the sagging porch steps of the cabin with a mug of instant coffee that had long since gone cold. Ranger sat beside him, posture steady, eyes scanning the tree line. It wasn't just a habit. It was who Ranger was, who they both were. Even here, surrounded by nothing but pines and snow, the shepherd acted like there was always something to protect. Logan reached down and rubbed behind the dog's ears. "You're still on duty, huh?" His voice was rough, but softer than it had been in years. Ranger leaned into his touch, then turned his head back toward the cabin door, nostrils flaring as if testing the air for ghosts. They had been like this since Afghanistan. Logan had been assigned to a security unit in Helmand Province, Ranger to the same base as a bomb detection K9. The dog had been paired with Logan's best friend, Corporal Jamie Stokes. The three of them had moved like a single organism through dusty alleys and open desert. Jamie leading, Ranger weaving just ahead, Logan covering their six. One morning, a roadside market, a scent in the air. Ranger stiffened, hackles up, nose pointing at a stack of burlap sacks. Jamie moved to check it. Logan remembered shouting, remembered pulling back hard on the leash, but the guitar world went white before he could get the words out. When the dust cleared, Jamie was gone. Ranger lay on his side, bleeding from one ear, but alive. Logan crawled to him, pulled him out of the rubble, held him like he was human. After that, Ranger wouldn't leave Logan's side. When Logan was rotated back stateside, he signed every paper he could to adopt him. They both came home limping in different ways. Now, sitting on the porch of a forgotten cabin in Montana, Logan realized they were still carrying that day like a wound that never quite scabbed over. He set the mug down, staring at his own hands. They still trembled in the mornings. He still woke at 2 a.m. to a sound that wasn't there. And when it got bad, it was Ranger's steady breathing beside him that anchored him to the present. Inside the cabin, the floorboard he'd pried up lay open, the tin still sitting in the hole. He'd closed it, but hadn't nailed it back down. Couldn't. Something about those letters unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He caught himself glancing at the door, expecting someone, or something, to step through. Ranger moved then, standing, tail horizontal, gaze fixed again on the inside. Logan felt the old instinct kick in. Read the dog first. The dog always knew first. "You smell it too," Logan said under his breath. Ranger padded to the door, nose low, ears pricked. He wasn't growling now, just moving with slow, deliberate intent. Logan followed, heart rate spiking the way it used to before a patrol. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and old paper. The tin was where he'd left it. Nothing else moved. Yet Ranger circled the trapdoor, nose brushing the seams. Then he stopped and looked up at Logan, eyes bright, waiting. "What, you think there's more?" Logan crouched and ran his hand over the floorboards again. Nothing shifted. He exhaled, trying to push away the rising tension. "I'm not ready for another ghost, pal." Ranger gave a low huff and sat, still facing the trapdoor. His presence filled the room like another person's would. Calm, unyielding. Logan stared at him. In all the years they'd been together, Ranger had only sat like that when he'd been absolutely sure of something. That was the thing about Ranger. He wasn't just a dog. He was a partner, a soldier who'd outlived the battlefield but not left it behind. Logan had once read that dogs could pick up on cortisol, on the tiniest changes in a person's body chemistry. Sometimes he wondered if Ranger could smell memories. He pushed the tin aside, pressed harder on the boards. This time something clicked in the far corner, a softer sound. He blinked. Ranger's head snapped toward it instantly. Logan crawled over. Another plank, narrower, hidden under a thick layer of dust. He pried it up with his fingers. Underneath was nothing but darkness, a narrow gap that disappeared into shadow. Cold air leaked out. Ranger leaned forward, nose over the sound. Whole, ears flicking. A faint sound drifted up. A drip, or maybe something scratching far below. Logan's mouth went dry. "Jesus," he whispered. "What is this place?" Ranger backed up a step, but didn't take his eyes off the gap. Logan closed the plank, heart hammering. He sat back on his heels and looked at the dog. "You and me, huh?" His voice cracked. "We come out here to get away from the past, and we just walked into somebody else's." Ranger tilted his head, that familiar expression that made him look almost like he understood every word. Logan reached for the leash but didn't clip it on. Instead, he rested his forehead against Ranger's for a moment, eyes closed. The dog stayed still, warm and solid. Not just an anchor. A witness. The cabin creaked around them. Somewhere in the distance a crow called. But inside, it was just a veteran and his war dog, both of them carrying ghosts, both of them sensing there was more hidden beneath this place than old wood and bad memories. By the third night in the cabin, the temperature had dropped to single digits. Frost crawled across the inside of the windows like white veins, and every breath Logan took came out in pale clouds. He had dragged an old mattress into the living room and rolled his sleeping bag out on it. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half shut but never fully asleep. It started with a sound. A faint, hollow thump beneath the floorboards. Logan froze, holding his breath. The cabin shifted in the wind all the time, but this was different, deeper, like something tapping from underneath. Ranger's ears shot up. His whole body stiffened. The shepherd rose silently, nose to the floor, and began moving in slow, measured steps across the room. He stopped in the center, the same spot where Logan had pried up the first plank days before. Ranger sniffed once, twice, then pressed his muzzle against the wood as if trying to breathe through it. A low, guttural growl rolled out of his chest. "What is it, boy?" Logan whispered. Ranger pawed at the boards, nails scraping with a harsh rasp. He moved to the left, nose brushing the baseboard, then swung back and stared at a patch of wall mottled with dark mold. He barked once, sharp, commanding. Logan sat up, heart climbing into his throat. "It's probably just a mouse nest," he said out loud, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "Or bats. Old houses make noise." But Ranger didn't buy it. His hackles were up, tail stiff. He barked again, deeper this time, then shoved his nose at the seam where the floor met the wall. Logan could hear his breath quicken, that heavy, snorting inhale he used to do on patrol when he caught a whiff of explosives. "Jesus, Ranger," Logan muttered, pulling on his boots. "You're making me jumpy." He got down on his knees and pressed his palm to the floor. Cold, solid. But when he shifted his weight, he felt it. a faint give, almost imperceptible, like a board laid over empty space. Ranger watched him, eyes flicking between Logan's face and the spot on the floor. Logan pressed again. The wood creaked. Dust sifted up from the seams. He sat back, staring at the dog. "You sure about this?" Ranger's answer was a third bark, sharper than the others, followed by a quick glance at the wall. He pawed at the floor once more, and then sat, body taut, like a soldier waiting for an order. Logan dragged the old rug aside. The boards beneath were stained dark with age. He knocked on them with his knuckles. The sound came back hollow. He swallowed. He remembered Afghanistan, the day Jamie died. Ranger had done this same thing, frozen in place, hackles raised, nose in the air. Logan hadn't listened fast enough then. He wasn't about to ignore him now. "All right," he said, his voice a rasp. "Let's see what you've got." He grabbed the screwdriver he'd left by the fireplace and wedged it under the edge of a board. It took a hard twist to break the nails loose. The wood came up with a groan, revealing a pocket of darkness. Cold air breathed out. Ranger moved closer, nose hovering just above the opening. He didn't growl now. He stood still, eyes fixed, ears flicking as though listening for something below. Logan angled the flashlight down. A crawl space ran beneath the cabin, deeper than he expected. The beam of light caught on something metallic a few feet in. A hinge, maybe, or the corner of a box. The air smelled damp, mixed with something sour and old, like wet pennies. He slid the plank aside, widening the hole. "Stay," he told Ranger, but the dog ignored him, crouching low, head cocked toward the gap. Logan lay on his stomach and reached down with the flashlight. The crawl space widened just enough for a person to squeeze through. Against the far wall sat a small, rusted door, flush with the earth, a padlock dangling broken. "What the hell?" he breathed. Behind him, Ranger gave a low rumble and shifted his weight forward, ready to jump in. "No," Logan said quickly. "Not yet." He sat back, wiping his hands on his jeans. His pulse hammered. The cabin he'd bought for $200 was supposed to be empty. A place to hide from the world, to start over. Instead, there was a hidden door under the living room and a dog who wouldn't stop warning him. Ranger finally looked up at him, eyes bright but steady. Logan recognized that look. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. Logan exhaled, running a hand over his face. "This isn't a mouse nest," he said quietly. "You're telling me something else." Ranger stood, muscles coiled, nose pointed at the opening. In the dim light of the cabin, with the wind hissing through the cracks, he looked less like a pet and more like a sentinel, one who'd been waiting for this moment far longer than Logan had. Outside, a branch snapped under the weight of snow. Logan flinched. The sound came too sharp, too close. Ranger's head snapped toward the window, ears high. Another crack, then silence. Logan reached for his jacket and his flashlight. "All right," he said to the dog. "Show me." Ranger jumped down first, landing light on the exposed earth of the crawl space. He turned his head back once, eyes catching the beam of the flashlight, and waited for Logan to follow. Logan dropped in after him, boots crunching on the cold dirt floor. The space smelled even worse down here. Rot, rust, something sweet underneath. Ranger led him to the small rusted door at the far wall, nose brushing the broken padlock. Logan bent down, fingers shaking as he reached for the handle. Ranger stayed at his side, a low vibration running through his chest. Together they stared at the door, both of them breathing hard. "On 3, Logan whispered, mostly to himself. 1. He pulled. The hinge shrieked and the door gave way, revealing a black tunnel carved into the earth. Air rushed out, colder than the Montana night. For a heartbeat, Neither man nor dog moved. Then Ranger stepped forward, nose low, tail still. Logan gripped the flashlight tighter. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "Looks like we're going in." It was 2 a.m. when the sound shattered the fragile quiet of the cabin. Logan's eyes snapped open, heart hammering before he even understood why. For a moment he thought it was a dream, the kind that dragged him back to the desert with sand in his mouth and Jamie's voice shouting his name. But it wasn't. It was Ranger. The German shepherd stood in the middle of the living room, hackles up, barking at the mold-streaked wall like he was staring down an enemy. Each bark was sharp, echoing against the rafters, filling the room with a vibration that went straight into Logan's chest. "Ranger!" Logan's voice cracked. He pushed off the mattress, sweat slick on his neck. "Quiet!" But Ranger didn't stop. His paws were planted, tail stiff, nose almost touching the wall. He barked again, louder, then growled, a sound Logan had only heard when the dog had cornered a bomb maker in Helmand. His nails scratched at the wood. Dust floated down from the ceiling with each bark. Logan's hands trembled. He pressed his palms to his eyes. The noise clawed at his nerves. He hadn't slept for more than an hour at a time since they'd found the trap door. Each time he drifted off, he saw Jamie's face, saw Ranger bleeding in the sand, saw the flash of the blast. Now the cabin was shaking with noise, and he was back there, back in it, except this time there was no radio, no squad, just him and his dog and that damned wall. "I said shut up!" His voice came out like a growl. He grabbed the empty mug from the floor and hurled it at the corner. It hit the baseboard and exploded into shards. Ranger flinched but didn't retreat. He barked again, eyes still locked on the wall. Something inside Logan snapped. He stepped forward, fists clenched. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "It's just mice, do you hear me? Just mice!" Ranger stopped barking but didn't move. He turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at Logan, eyes glinting in the dim light. Not fearful, not even reproachful. Just steady, as if to say, "You're wrong." The silence that followed was worse than the barking. Logan's breath came fast. He could feel his pulse in his temples. The walls felt closer. He stumbled back, grabbing his jacket, and shoved the door open. Cold air knifed in. Without looking at Ranger, he stepped outside and slammed the door. The night was black and brittle. Snow glittered under the moonlight. Logan leaned against the porch railing, trying to slow his breathing. His hands were shaking so hard he jammed them into his pockets. He closed his eyes, but the images didn't stop. The blast, the sand, Jamie's outstretched arm. He saw Ranger lying on his side again, ear torn, blood soaking his fur. Only this time, Ranger wasn't moving. He opened his eyes, staring into the tree line. A crow called somewhere far off. The cabin behind him creaked. He could still hear Ranger moving inside, a faint shuffle of paws on wood. Not pacing. Waiting. Logan swallowed hard. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the empty night. Inside, Ranger sat down in the dark. He didn't whine. He didn't bark. He lowered his head, listening. The house made sounds humans ignored. The drip of melting ice in the crawl space. The subtle shift of wood expanding in the cold. A thin rasp like a nail dragged across stone far below. Ranger's ears flicked. He pressed his nose against the baseboard again, inhaled deeply, then lifted his head. His eyes shone, steady and bright. Outside, Logan stared at his own breath rising in clouds. The guilt settled in fast, heavier than the cold. He had yelled at Ranger, thrown a cup like some drunk he used to arrest. That wasn't who he was. That wasn't who they were. He thought about going back inside, about kneeling down and burying his face in the dog's fur the way he had in Helmand when the world ended around them. But he stayed on the porch, paralyzed, until the shaking in his hands stopped. Somewhere in his chest, a small voice whispered that Ranger had been right every single time before. Every time. Inside the cabin, Ranger lifted his head toward the ceiling. The sound from below had stopped. For now. He lay down again, still watching the wall, still on duty, even if his partner wasn't ready to face it yet. Morning light filtered through the dirty windows like a fogged memory, dull and grey. Logan moved through the living room slowly, dragging a broom across the scattered glass from the night before. The mug he'd hurled had exploded against the baseboard, shards catching under the ragged edge of the old rug. He hadn't spoken to Ranger yet. The dog sat a few feet away, alert but still, watching him, without judgment. His eyes followed each of Logan's movements. No resentment, no fear, just quiet presence. As Logan knelt to sweep up a final cluster of glass, he noticed something strange in the fibers of the rug. A tear, small but deliberate, not a snag from furniture or age. It had been pulled, scratched. He glanced at Ranger, who held his gaze for a beat, then flicked his eyes toward the rug. Logan narrowed his own. "You do this?" Ranger didn't move. Logan pulled the rug back. The floor beneath was coated in dust, thick enough to choke. But in the center was a faint outline, a square, barely visible through the grime, the edge of a wooden trapdoor. "What the hell?" Logan whispered. He brushed away the dirt with his sleeve, revealing more clearly the warped wood and an old iron ring embedded in the center. The trapdoor was the same weathered grey as the rest of the floor, but slightly sunken, like it had warped under pressure. Ranger stood now, tail still, head low, watching the door like it might open on its own. Logan grabbed the ring and pulled. The wood groaned. Years of damp had swollen the edges, and it took 3 hard tugs before it gave way with a wet crack. A gust of air escaped from below, cold and fetid, like something long sealed and better left untouched. The smell hit him hard. Earth, rot, and something sharp underneath, metallic and wrong. He pulled his shirt over his nose instinctively. Ranger's nose twitched. He didn't growl. He didn't back away. But the fur along his spine lifted like it had the day they'd found the tin. He moved closer, peering into the dark hole as if expecting to see something, looking back. Logan aimed his flashlight down. The beam fell on a short wooden ladder, then onto dirt floor a few feet below. The space was larger than a crawl space, a full cellar, maybe 8 feet deep. The light glinted off something in the far corner. Metal. Logan squinted. Then it hit him. A chain. Not new, not the kind for tools or storage. A rusted iron chain, thick links bolted into the concrete wall. Next to it, a small pile of tattered fabric and what looked like the remnants of a mattress, now no more than a filthy rectangle of springs. He felt his chest tighten. "Why the hell would someone chain something down here?" Ranger let out a low whine. Not fear, something deeper. Recognition. He inched closer to the opening, but Logan held up a hand. "Wait." He grabbed his boots and tugged them on, heart pounding harder with every breath. The air from below was colder now, and the scent had shifted too. More decay, like something once alive had spent a long time rotting down there. Flashlight in one hand, he eased himself onto the ladder. The wood creaked, but held. When his boots touched dirt, it crunched underfoot. Loose soil, scattered straw, and tiny bones. He swung the beam across the cellar. The chain in the corner was wrapped around a bolt the size of his forearm. The end was snapped clean, but the anchor remained. Near it, scratch marks marred the stone wall. Deep gouges clustered low to the ground, like someone, or something, had tried to claw its way out. He turned in a slow circle. On the far wall, etched faintly into the wood with something sharp, were the letters, "Still here." Logan stepped back. A cold spike ran down his spine. Something about the message felt fresh, not the carving itself. It had dulled with time, but the meaning, like it had waited, like it was personal. He heard Ranger shift above, a faint whine of unease. "I'm okay," he called, voice echoing strangely in the confined space. He crouched near the broken chain, shining the light over the mattress. Rats had torn through most of it, but a piece of cloth remained. A child's pillowcase, pink, with faded cartoon bears along the hem. His breath caught. There were no toys, no food, no blankets, just the chain, the spring mattress, and the pillowcase. He looked back up at the carved words. Still here. Climbing out felt harder than going in. When he emerged, Ranger was waiting, eyes never leaving the trapdoor. Logan pulled the cover shut and sat on the floor beside it, heart pounding. "I don't know what the hell that was," he whispered. "But you were right." Ranger eased closer and lay beside him, pressing his shoulder gently against Logan's side. They sat in silence, the smell of rot still clinging to their clothes. And for the first time since the desert, Logan wasn't sure which ghosts were worse, those from war or the ones living under his own floor. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but the wind carried a cold that bit through flannel and denim like razor wire. Logan stood at the edge of the trapdoor with a flashlight in one hand, a crowbar in the other. He hadn't slept. Neither had Ranger, who stood beside him like a statue, eyes fixed on the dark hole as if it might speak. They went down together. The cellar was even colder this time, and not just from the weather, the kind of cold that settled in your chest, made your skin crawl. Ranger landed softly beside him, nose twitching, body low to the ground. He moved forward slowly, head swaying side to side, like a soldier clearing a room. Halfway across the dirt floor, he stopped, completely still. Logan stepped up beside him. "What is it?" Ranger didn't move. He stared at something in the shadows, then crept forward. His nose brushed against a mound of loose soil near the far wall. He sniffed once, twice, then began to dig. Not frantic, deliberate, focused, like he knew exactly where to go. Logan dropped to one knee and started helping. The dirt gave way to the edge of a small metal box, rusted on the corners, lid warped with age. Logan brushed away the rest of the soil and pulled it free. It was heavier than it looked. Ranger stepped back, his gaze never leaving the box. Logan sat cross-legged on the cold floor and pried it open with the crowbar. The hinges shrieked in protest, metal flaking off like ash. Inside, neatly stacked and tied with old string, were dozens of letters. Some were folded in halves, others tucked into envelopes stained yellow with time. Beneath them, a spiral-bound journal, water-damaged but still legible. He picked it up carefully. The first page was smudged, the ink faded, but the name scrawled at the top was still clear. Miriam. Winter 1978. He glanced at Ranger. The dog was sitting now, ears forward, tail still, waiting. Logan opened the journal. The handwriting was slanted and anxious, lines tight and pressed to the paper. He read aloud, his voice low in the dim cellar. Day 14. Snow hasn't stopped. He boarded the windows last night. Said I can't leave until I learn my lesson. I don't even know what that means anymore. Logan flipped a few pages. Day 27. I hear something under the floor sometimes. It's not mice. I know what mice sound like. This is something else. He doesn't hear it. Or pretends not to. Another entry. Day 49. I'm pregnant. I haven't told him. I won't. He said I'm not allowed to speak unless spoken to. But I've been whispering to the baby at night. I tell it not to be afraid. That I'll get us out of here. That someone will find us. Logan felt his throat tighten. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. Day 63. He found the drawings I made, tore them up, locked me in the cellar for 3 days, gave me half a can of beans and said it was a feast. I think he wants me to lose the baby. Ranger stood suddenly, his head turned toward the tunnel near the rear of the cellar, the one that had been dug by hand, maybe years before. He growled, but not loud, a sound of unease, of recognition. Logan stood too, the journal still open in one hand. He looked toward the tunnel. She was kept down here, he whispered. For months. He looked back at the box, leafing through the letters. Most were addressed to no one. Some had just a single name scrawled in shaking ink. Mom. Others said things like, to whoever finds this, and please remember me. One envelope was marked in red crayon. If you read this, I didn't make it out. He didn't open it. Instead, he picked up the pillowcase they had uncovered earlier, the one with the cartoon bears, and held it next to the journal. Jesus, Miriam, he breathed. You weren't crazy. You were trying to leave a map. Ranger moved toward the tunnel, nose low. He stopped at the entrance, sniffed again, then looked back at Logan. Not with fear, with certainty. Logan tucked the journal under his arm. We're not done here, he said quietly. He ran his hand once along Ranger's back. The dog didn't move, eyes still on the dark passage. Logan stared into the blackness and thought about the words she had written. A baby that never got to be born. Still here. Please remember me. And suddenly, this wasn't just about ghosts anymore. It was about justice. Justice buried under snow and dirt and silence. And now, finally, someone was listening. Logan parked his truck outside the Livingston Public Library, a squat red brick building that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. It was the kind of place where time moved slow and paper still mattered. Ranger sat in the back seat, watching Logan through the windshield, eyes steady and patient. He wouldn't bark or whine. He knew when Logan needed to walk alone. Inside, the air smelled like yellowed paper and varnish. The front desk was empty, except for a young man in a beanie who looked up briefly and offered a polite nod. Logan returned it and headed toward the archives. The town was small, quiet. People didn't ask too many questions out here, which suited him fine. But today, he had questions of his own. And most of them pointed back to that journal. Back to Miriam. The local archives were tucked into a back room, shelves stacked with microfilm, town ledgers, and property records dating back over 100 years. Logan signed in with a ballpoint pen chained to the desk and got to work. The cabin's address hadn't even come with the auction listing. It was marked as Parcel off County Road 19, unclaimed. But after cross-referencing land deeds, he finally found it. The property had once belonged to a man named Ellis G. Reardon. Logan froze at the name. Reardon. He sat back, breath caught in his throat. He knew that name. It had come up once in Jamie's stories, back in Afghanistan. An old-timer, some weird vet who had served in the same unit decades earlier. Reclusive, paranoid. Lived off the grid somewhere in Montana. Jamie had joked that Reardon had probably built his cabin out of tinfoil and landmines. Logan's stomach turned. He dug deeper, pulling county property logs. Reardon had bought the land in 1975. Cash. No mortgage. The deed was transferred in his name alone. No family listed. For the next few years there were no updates, no taxes paid, no complaints filed, just silence. Until 1979. The record showed a missing persons report, filed by a sister in Bozeman. Ellis Reardon had vanished. No body, no vehicle, just gone. Logan's hands clenched around the folder. The timeline matched. Miriam's last journal entry had been dated January 1979, just before Reardon disappeared. He flipped through the journal pages again, focusing on the entry she had labeled in all caps. He brought another soldier to dinner. Logan reread the words slowly. He said the man was from his old unit, that he could trust him. But I begged the soldier to help me. I whispered when Reardon stepped outside. I told him about the chain, the baby, the cold. I gave him a note, slipped it into his jacket pocket. I think he saw it. I think he knew. Logan turned cold. She had begged a soldier for help, one from Reardon's unit. She'd slipped him a note. Logan stood, staring at the concrete floor of the archive room, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, deep in the dust and gunpowder of a different war. Jamie's last mission, the night they'd chased a false lead through a bomb-rigged compound. Jamie had taken point. Logan had covered the rear. Ranger had warned them, but the signal had come too late. The blast had buried Jamie, crushed his ribs, severed an artery. Logan had dragged him out by his vest. He remembered Jamie's blood on his own hands, the look in his eyes. But what if Jamie hadn't just died in a war? What if he'd been carrying something? A note? A secret? Something he never got the chance to deliver? Logan's knees buckled slightly. He sat hard in the wooden chair, the journal spread open on his lap. One of the letters tucked into the box had been addressed simply, "To the man who listened." He remembered Jamie's jacket, the inside pocket, the one no one had checked because it had been burned and bloody. His chest tightened. He stood up fast, shoving the journal back into his pack and heading for the door. Outside, Ranger perked up immediately, sensing the storm inside his human. Logan opened the truck door and leaned against the frame, staring at the horizon. "She tried to get out," he said, voice low and broken. "She tried to tell someone." Ranger stepped forward and pressed his head gently against Logan's leg. Logan didn't move for a long moment. Then he reached down and buried his hand in the dog's fur. "My best friend might have died carrying her story," he whispered. "And I never even knew." His voice cracked on the last word. Ranger didn't flinch. The cabin wasn't just haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by silence. And now, for the first time in decades, someone was listening again, and someone was going to answer. The sky hung low with thick grey clouds, the kind that threatened snow but never followed through. Logan stood at the back edge of the cabin property, the wind cutting sharp against his face. Ranger was a few steps ahead, nose to the frozen earth, tail low but steady. He had led them here without hesitation, past the rusted clothes line, beyond the collapsing shed, until he reached a small rise in the yard that looked like nothing more than a soft patch of overgrown grass, but he refused to leave it. He sniffed once more, then sat, eyes locked on Logan. "You sure?" Logan asked softly. Ranger didn't blink. Logan dropped to his knees and brushed aside the layer of brittle weeds. The ground was uneven, and when he pressed down, it gave a little too soft for the season. He took off his gloves and began to dig with his hands. The first few inches were just cold earth and dead roots. Then his fingers caught on fabric, thin, frayed, buried deep in the soil. He dug faster now, using the flat of a shovel he'd brought from the shed. Within minutes, he had unearthed more cloth. A blanket, discolored with time, wrapped around something tightly. Ranger stood again, pacing in a slow circle, his breathing quiet like he knew what was coming. Logan peeled the edges of the blanket back. Inside were bones. Small, fragile, curled in on themselves like someone had been trying to stay warm. His breath hitched. Among the bones was a rusted chain, the same thickness as the one from the cellar. At the center, clutched in one bony hand, was a hair clip. Tarnished silver, delicate, and engraved with a single name. Miriam. Logan sat back, breath caught in his throat. The wind had died completely. Not even the trees moved. Ranger pressed his body beside him, silent and still. A steady presence in a moment that felt like the world had gone hollow. They had found her. Not just her story. Not just her journal. Her. He reached down and gently brushed dirt from the clip. There was something sacred about the way she had been buried. No marker, no ceremony, just hidden in silence, as if someone hoped she'd never be found. Logan's hands curled into fists. She deserved better, he whispered. The crunch of boots in snow snapped both their heads around. A man was approaching from the tree line. Mid-40s, maybe older, tall with sun-worn skin and dark eyes that didn't flinch under Logan's stare. He carried no weapon, just a canvas messenger bag slung across his shoulder and a paper folder pressed to his chest. Ranger moved to stand between Logan and the stranger, body tense but not aggressive. The man raised one hand slowly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Logan stood. "Who are you?" The man looked down at the disturbed soil, at the blanket, at what they'd uncovered. "I think," he said quietly, "you just found my mother." The world narrowed. "What did you say?" "My name's David," the man said. "David Reardon. She named me after her father. I never met him. Never met her either. I was born in a hospital across the border, left in a drop box. But I've spent the last 20 years trying to figure out where I came from. I had DNA tested last year. It led me to a file, an old investigation, sealed. Your cabin came up. So I came looking." He looked back down at the grave. "I didn't expect to find her. I didn't even know she existed until 6 months ago." Logan couldn't speak. His mind swirled with the timeline, the impossible web of pain and silence that had led to this moment. David crouched, hands trembling as he opened the folder. Inside were copies of a letter, black and white photos of the cabin, even a scanned page from Miriam's journal, the same handwriting Logan had read underground. "I think she tried to reach someone," David said. "A soldier. I think he might have tried to help, but he disappeared too." Logan nodded slowly. "His name was Jamie Stokes. He was my best friend." Their eyes met. Neither said anything for a long time. Ranger stepped forward and nudged David's leg, as if to say, "We know." The man knelt beside the bones, tears welling but not falling. His fingers touched the edge of the blanket. He didn't try to speak again. Logan finally whispered, "She kept you alive." David nodded. "And now she's not forgotten." Snow began to fall then, light, quiet flakes drifting down over the clearing, dusting the grave, softening the edges of the earth. Ranger lay beside the grave, his body forming a protective curve, eyes never closing, as if standing watch, as if telling the past, "We see you now." And for the first time in decades, Miriam was not alone. The small-town sheriff's department didn't quite know what to do with what Logan handed them. A rusted hair clip engraved with a name. A blanket-wrapped skeleton buried in the backyard. A box of handwritten letters from a girl who'd never been reported missing. A journal full of horror. And a man, David, whose DNA and life story connected the final dots. Detective Corbin, grey-haired and skeptical at first, sat across from Logan in the cramped interrogation room, flipping through the copied pages of Miriam's journal. His eyes stopped at the words, "He chained me to the wall." "This cabin," Corbin said slowly. "It belonged to Ellis Reardon, didn't it?" Logan nodded once. "He's the one she wrote about. Not her biological father. Her stepfather. He disappeared in 1979. Never found. He ran," Logan said, jaw clenched. "She was trying to tell someone. He probably found out." Corbin rubbed a hand over his face. "You realize if we pursue this, it opens up a cold case we never filed in the first place." "I don't care," Logan replied. "She deserves more than silence." The next few weeks moved quickly. Then, all at once, DNA confirmed the remains were female, early 20s. David's connection held. The handwriting matched that of a middle school essay still on file in an old county archive. Miriam Reardon, submitted in 1977. The sheriff's office reopened the case, this time with evidence. The chain, the bones, the journal. A half-burned letter Logan had recovered from under a floorboard. And the biggest shock of all, Ellis Reardon had resurfaced in Alberta 5 years earlier under a false name. He'd died in hospice care 2 months before Logan ever bought the cabin. They would never see him brought to trial, but what they could do was name him. In the press conference, Sheriff Corbin read aloud from Miriam's final journal entry. She wrote, "If no one comes, I will still believe that someone someday will care." He cleared his throat before continuing. "This young woman was buried and forgotten. But thanks to a local veteran and his service dog, she was finally found. Her voice was heard." That evening, the town council invited Logan and Ranger to a quiet ceremony at the county courthouse. Nothing fancy. A few flags, a plaque. But when the mayor handed Logan the certificate for Ranger, his throat tightened. It read, "Ranger, Canine Civilian of Honor, for unwavering loyalty and service to justice." Ranger sat proudly at Logan's side, ears perked, tail curled neatly around his feet. He didn't understand awards or speeches, but he understood the shift in Logan's posture, the way the man held himself again. Not bowed, not broken. Later that night, Logan stood alone at the edge of the yard behind the cabin. David had flown home. Reporters had moved on. Snow covered Miriam's grave now, but beneath it lay a new headstone the sheriff's office had commissioned. Miriam Reardon, 1958 to 1979. She was never forgotten. Logan knelt beside the grave, one hand resting on Ranger's back. "I don't know why this came to us," he said quietly. "Why now? Why here? But you knew, didn't you?" Ranger turned his head, his eyes meeting Logan's with something deeper than instinct, a quiet understanding. "For all the things I couldn't save," Logan whispered. "Thank you for helping me save her." The wind moved through the trees like breath. Inside the cabin, warmth flickered from the wood stove Logan had finally fixed. It wasn't much, but it was a home now. And for the first time in years, Logan Pierce felt like a man with purpose again. Not because of war, not because of duty, but because a dog refused to let a ghost stay buried. 3 months later, the snow had melted into a patchwork of green and brown, the mountain air turning crisp with early spring. The cabin had changed. The windows were no longer clouded with dust, the porch no longer sagged, and the trapdoor in the living room had been sealed and covered with new boards. But not erased. Logan stayed. He could have sold the place, walked away, pretended it had just been a strange detour in an already fractured life. but something in the soil had anchored him. Something in the bones, in the journals, in Ranger's still gaze on that first day. They had been led here for a reason, and he wasn't about to walk away from it. Instead, he built something new. What began with a single flyer pinned to the grocery store bulletin board turned into a program. A modest one. A converted barn down the road became the main facility. A hand-painted sign over the gate read, "Echo Point, healing for warriors and their dogs." It wasn't therapy in the traditional sense. There were no sterile couches, no fluorescent lights, just long walks through pine trails, quiet evenings by the fire, and days filled with simple tasks, stacking wood, grooming dogs, talking when the words came, and silence when they didn't. Veterans came from all over, some with their own service dogs, some without, some who hadn't spoken to anyone about the war in years. But here, in this place steeped in old stories and buried pain, they started again. Ranger greeted each of them. He no longer stood rigid like he had in Afghanistan. He didn't bark. He didn't scan every window for threats. Now he laid by the door, tail thumping softly as they arrived. One paw crossed over the other, ears perked, not to warn, but to welcome. He had learned to live again. So had Logan. One afternoon, while the sky was stretching itself into a gold-streaked dusk, a young girl sat cross-legged on the porch beside Ranger. She was 11, the daughter of a vet in the program, visiting for the week. She scratched Ranger's ear and turned to Logan, who was mending a fence a few yards away. "Mr. Logan?" she called. He looked up. "That dog didn't just bark at ghosts," she said. "He barked at the truth." Logan smiled, slow and quiet. "Yeah," he said. He did. She leaned down and whispered something to Ranger, who nuzzled her hand and rested his head on her lap. She didn't tell Logan what she'd said. She didn't need to. Inside the barn, someone was playing an old guitar. A dog barked once in the distance. A screen door creaked. The world kept moving, but something sacred remained. In a glass case inside the main room, next to photos of Ranger and Logan during their service, sat Miriam's journal, not displayed as a horror, but a reminder. Beneath it was a plaque. Her story was heard. Because one dog refused to stop listening. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Logan walked back to the porch. Ranger looked up, then stood and stretched before sitting beside him. The two of them looked out at the land, scarred, quiet, and whole again. Logan reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ear. "You did good, partner." Ranger leaned into the touch, eyes soft. They stayed there as the light faded, not saying a word. Some stories don't end with a gunshot or a court verdict. Some end with a dog lying in the sun, a man who found his way home, and a question that still floats on the wind. What's your story with a loyal pet? If this story moved you, if Ranger reminded you of a dog who once changed your life, or is still changing it, help us keep telling these stories. Support the channel, subscribe, share. For every unsung hero with 4 paws and a loyal heart, this one's for them. This is the German Shepherd channel, and their stories are just getting started.